Gameplan for Good is the podcast that brings you stories of world shakers and champions of change. Join us as we dive into the journeys of innovative business leaders who are making a positive impact and creating a better world. Uncover their game plans for success, discover groundbreaking innovations, and be inspired to unleash your own potential. Get ready for a brighter future in business with Gameplan for Good. Hey guys, welcome to episode 2 of Gameplan for Good. Very excited to have an awesome guest here today. In fact, I feel like I should have paid you in the last hour that we've been kind of catching up and talking, because I feel like I've come from here to here in my business in that hour or so. Actually, it's longer than an hour. We had a lot to talk about. We've got a lot to dig into today. I have with me Chris Hall, not Phil.
Not Phil.
That I've been accidentally calling you at times. Forgive me if I call you Phil today. But we have Chris Hall here, who is an ambassador for startups in the city of Casey. So I know there's a lot of things I want to get to. I might skip some of your backstory actually, just so we can get to that, because today we really just want to, or in this episode, we want to give startups, people in startups, some tips on what are those 3 different stages of startups you mentioned to me?
So we were saying before about ideation, validation, and scale.
Yeah, so we want to give a lot of value in those the people in those different stages of startups. But let's get into a little bit of your backstory. Electronics.
Consumer electronics, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so 20 odd years in that. And just quickly, I will hold you to blame for that hour conversation we had beforehand, because it's that cozy little green room that you've got with your Chesterfield lounge, and it's way too easy to get comfy in there and badger all day.
We serve great coffee too, don't we?
It was good actually, yeah. So the work that I do, as you touched upon, is with the city of Casey, and I work directly with startups and sort of new innovative business ideas. So part of that is sort of working directly with all of these new entrepreneurs as they're discovering all of their disruptive technologies and what it means for market. And then the other part of that is really plugging that into the broader ecosystem of what innovation means. So normally when the startups come through, we kind of identify whether they're on that ideation, validation or scale part of the process, and that will normally determine the level of support that we offer them and what we do with them.
When you say we, who is the we?
Well, everything's a collective we, isn't it? It's not about I. There's no I in team. There's a we. So the program itself is actually initially, without going into the backstory, initially I came on board with the City of Casey via LaunchVic funding, which was there to support the startup ecosystems in the north, south, east and west of Melbourne. What they found, it was a very fragmented community, and they wanted to ensure that these new ideas were given the opportunity to flourish. Yep. So that funding was put there for 12 months, and my responsibility was to kind of put together a program and hand that over to local government to then continue with.
Yeah, so 12 months later, you successful job and you left.
Yeah, well, I handed them the report and they kind of looked at me and said, well, what do we do with this? And then they said, how do you feel about staying around? And 5 years later, I sort of say it's a bit like Hotel California. You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave.
Yeah, right. No, awesome. So success with startups. Let me know about some of your success with startups. You mentioned crowdfunding.
Yeah. So as you said, 20 odd years in the consumer electronics game. I identify as a Xennial. So I'm right on that cusp of kind of Gen Z, and right on the cusp of kind of where the millennials were starting to learn all these new tech pieces. So I always tell people I went through school with no internet. Literally got through to the end of year 12 with no internet access within the school. Yep. And then it was only after that sort of discovered the magical world of www. But opportunity-wise, really, I've been able to sort of ride that curve across the inception of new technologies. So the impact of smartphones when that came out sort of moved us then into the pieces around app development and the solutions there. And then sort of more recently in the areas of big data and the impact of that. And of course now all the new world of AI and where all that's going to. So so across that period of time I've had a few different companies, and all the way from the romantic startup of literally 3 guys in a garage with a few post-it notes, and all the way through to kind of an organisation then that built up to about 20 odd developers that we moved across. So
you've scaled and sold a few startups?
Yeah. Look, I think if I'm going to be as self-aware as possible within that process, one of the things that I've identified is that I thrive off the electric energy of early stage startup.
Right.
So I think where the magical time of a company is in that early stage. What are we trying to do here? Actually starting that process.
Yeah.
Once the company matures, I start to lose interest a bit. So,
Yeah.
so I've kind of found, and that's actually been very helpful for me on that.
Helpful
process.
for me too, because I'm at that early stage, and we had a couple of an hour or so of you digging into what I'm doing and where I'm going, and that was really valuable. But you mentioned a success in 71st in the world.
The crowdfunding,
Yeah. What was?
Yeah, so look, I joke with people that if I'm ever going to write a book, then I know the title of the book, and it's going to be How I Raised $2.4 million in 29 days.
Yes,
because it's a great title. Yeah, it's kind of one of those things that immediately captures the that romantic idea of what funding should look like and what you can do. Look, in all honesty, it was more than 29 days, as every story is. It kind of, potentially in the background, there was about 6-month lead-in work to that, and there was 5 people behind it all. But yeah, we did a Indiegogo campaign for a product that we hadn't even made yet. It was all based off pre-sales, 3D models.
Did you use video in that?
We did use video.
Oh,
in fact,
good.
video was imperative to the storytelling piece to that. Yeah. But yeah, no, look, took it out on. Originally, we had Kickstarter booked in. We went over to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. We got schmoozed by the team at Indiegogo, so we moved across to their platform for the crowdfunding. And 2.4 million we raised in 29 days.
Congratulations, that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I get a distant memory now, but there was a
still
few
great
years
experience
back,
and great learning.
yeah. And look, I can dig as deep in the story as what you like, but I can tell you we had a formula. We knew how to, I guess, break the algorithm of what was required to raise that kind of money, and all of our assumptive guesses were wrong when we first launched. So the bit of the story I don't normally tell is that we launched the campaign and we pulled it within 48 hours because we realised we made a few critical mistakes, and then we relaunched it again 7 days later, and literally we'd made our first $250,000 in the 24 hours. So if you can work out the algorithms and how they play the game, then you can actually play into that and almost hack the system. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So Innovation Crowd.
So Innovation Crowd was not the name I chose for the program. It was kind of a name I inherited when they put together what it was going to be. But I don't mind it. It kind of it captured the idea of what they were trying to do, which was really support innovative ideas within the community. As I mentioned, it's changed somewhat for over the years that I've been there. So originally it was focused most specifically on working with startups, and by the classic definition of startup. So those who really hadn't even started to turn that into a business yet, they were just looking for opportunities to be able to do, say, rapid prototyping, software development, understand the basics behind marketing, building a brand, sort of early stage business builds. And then now when we talk about the Innovation Crowd, it represents what I sort of look at as the community-wide piece. So we have roughly about 300 odd community members within the Innovation Crowd.
Wow.
And that's a mixture of mentors, cohort, supporting partners. So literally we sort of almost work as a facilitator in the middle of all that. Somebody will come in and say, hey, I've got an idea, and then we'll look at that ecosystem of partners that we've got and work out where we can plug them into all that and make all that happen. And now we've got a partner we could talk about, a podcast studio as well, to be able to plug in.
Yeah, I am in the Innovation Crowd.
Yeah.
100%. So let's go back. Let's go back to I'm of the kind of the philosophy that we return to what we did as children. And this is a curveball question for you because we didn't talk about this.
No.
But myself, my backstory, when I was about 7 or 8 years old, we had an uncle that would bring a video camera when he would visit, and he'd obviously bring his kids, we'd have cousins around and that sort of thing. And I used to create these short films. So I'd get my brothers, my sisters, and my cousins into these little short films. I'd use special effects. I'd get one of them into a toy box, and I'd get him to jump out, and then I'd cut it, and then I'd get someone else in the toy box, and then I'd get them to jump out, and then I'd cut it, and I'd try to make it look like I don't have a locked off camera, by the way, so it's obviously not, you know, a box full of 20 kids. But I would be doing that, and I would be editing in camera. So I had no editing software whatsoever, and I'd be editing in camera. And if someone stuffed up, if one of them stuffed up, then I'd have to look in the camera and reverse, rewind, get it to the right point, and then have a short film at the end of it. And so my career journey went through, I think I went into tourism. I don't know why I went into tourism straight after school, but I was, you know, working factories, tourism, taxi driver, teacher, wedding photographer. But I found that I came a full circle back to what I love, which is video production, and just naturally drawn towards that, and directing, and producing, and those sorts of things. So, can you think of something in your childhood where, you know, the skill set or the passion that you have now, are there identifiers in your childhood that you can?
Hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? You can always
it's a curveball. It's a curveball question.
No, and it's funny. Like even you telling that story, I kind of because I'm a bit of a movie buff myself, and
nice.
you know, I even go back probably a bit further than that. This is sort of early '80s when there was certainly no video cameras lying around, but I remember having a tape recording of Indiana Jones, and we used to reenact with a stack hat, the idol. And I had a friend who was a little bit bigger than me, and he'd sort of curl up in a ball and roll down the hallway and pretend that he was the big rock that came along. But yeah, look, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, whether you're going to identify that with startups or with technology, if I kind of look back, one of the biggest moments for me was my dad actually buying the first computer. So my very first computer was a TRS-80. It was a Tandy model computer. And this was even before the Commodore 64.
Tandy. Wow.
Yeah. Tandy Electronics. Yeah. And yeah, so the TRS-80, which had the old tape deck that you'd play to actually load up all of your games on there, and what was great about the TRS-80 was it actually had some very rudimentary, you know, kind of coding capability in that. So you could kind of code things up to do some basic stuff on there, and keeping in mind it was 64 meg, you know, memory capacity. So, so I guess in terms of that journey, that probably set a direction in terms of this is interesting. You can create things, you can make things. So that probably started the path. I think always having an interest in technology itself probably led me into what started the journey for me, which was actually working at Sony. And that's when Sony had retail outlets. They were a big brand throughout the sort of the mid to late 90s. They really dominated the space. And so I ended up working in there, and I sort of tell the story around I sold one of the first plasma TVs in Australia.
Wow.
And I do remember it was a 42-inch, and that was $47,000.
So it's your fault.
Yeah. But I mean, that was a time when they were just easing out the VCR.
Yeah.
They were just sort of moving into mini disc. So we still had the no skip CD players, but they were kind of slowly moving into digital.
Do you get that sense of nostalgia? Like I watch a lot of TikTok, and sometimes they'll show a video it's just any footage from the 90s. And I'll just sit there and I'll just go into a daydream. It's like just takes me straight back, or something from the 80s. And it's like, do you have when you see a Walkman, for example, or a Discman, or, you know, does it kind of take you back? And
yes and no. I mean, look, obviously you can't help but look at it, you know, nostalgically and kind of remember, you know, the good times. But
I get in a mental time machine and I go back there for 5 minutes and watch a video of people doing nothing in the 80s. That's enough.
Look, I look at what technology's brought us, and I think that's the piece, is that you always live in the context of now. So I kind of look at the luxuries that we have now, and I just don't know whether it's easy to romantically remember the Walkman, but then you know, you start to anchor all the memories to that, and you couldn't go running with the thing. Your batteries would run out. Your CD would slow down.
The tape would come apart.
Yeah. So I think, you know, obviously having Spotify now, it's not even 2,500 songs in the pocket. It's every song ever made in the history of man is in the pocket. But kind of it's hard to jump backwards from that and kind of remember it beyond nostalgia, beyond that simplicity of what it is.
Exactly. Yeah, but it's moving. It's moving so fast now, and we
is.
can get onto that topic of technology and where it's going.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on what's happening with AI and?
So look,
Oh,
that was.
Tell me about your 90-day binge, or what do you call it?
Well,
Not a 90-day
deep dive, yeah.
90-day deep dive.
So,
Tell me about that.
yeah. Well, that was a little life hack that I worked out over a decade ago. I remember reading an article that was saying that if you put 100 hours into something, you'll know more on that particular topic than 90% of the population. And I kind of thought that was interesting. I thought, my dad's philosophy, which was you learn something new every day, and he literally had a library of books. We had a custom-made bookshelf and a room made for him for all of the books.
Yep.
So, and one of the things I always admired about him was that we could go anywhere. He could have a conversation with anyone. Didn't matter what their background was, what they were talking about. He could dive straight into the topic because he was conversant on it because he'd read enough about it. So I think maybe I probably picked up that piece from there, but it was kind of this idea that, if something catches my interest, I want to dig down into the rabbit hole as far as that goes. So I started doing these cycles of just 90-day deep dives, and across the 10 years, I've explored everything from psychology to philosophy to economics to politics to technology pieces. Throughout that cycle, there's been blockchain, there's been a whole bunch of things that have come through. And I was making the comment as we were talking in the green room that AI. So I went to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas in January, which was great just to get in the middle of all the conversation of what's happening right now with AI. And that was only 6 weeks after ChatGPT had been sort of officially, the go button had been hit. There's obviously a lot of chatter around it, and there's the old school players have been playing in machine learning and IBM Watson and sort of built out very silo-based solutions. But I think even going into that show, we all had this sense that something had changed. So I came back from that and sort of thought, look, this next 90-day deep dive for me is going to be around AI. And having done this cycle a few times now over the years, the one that blew me away was that literally everything I researched in the first few weeks of that 90 days was almost redundant by the time I got to the last 4 weeks. So it's the first time that I felt this level of momentum within a technology piece. And so, of course, within that, you need to know why. You need to understand why. So I probably went further down the rabbit warren than I intended to. And of course, as
you're probably not out of that hole, are you?
No. Look, it's and to be honest, I mean, it's very hard not to be in equal measure excited and scared to hell of where it could potentially end up, because I just don't think, and you'll hear this alignment argument that's sort of coming up a lot now, and we need to pause this thing to actually sort of work out a level of alignment of we haven't even worked out ourselves yet. So being able to try and to carry that through and have these discussions around creating a sentient, sort of being, and we haven't even worked out ourselves yet, but we want to carry that into artificial intelligence. It's scary. So I think,
and it's amazing because of the opportunity that it offers. I was working on a short film recently, and we had a script, and the script was written by someone who's older than me, and I was editing the script. But the short film is targeted at young people for to help with suicide prevention, and so it was really important that we use the language that young people use, and we were trying our best. But I'd bounce it off some of my kids, and they'd say, "Oh, look, that's not really how we speak." Anyway, I ran the whole script through ChatGPT, and piece by piece, and it just gave me suggestions for how to change the language, and it even gave me plot suggestions as well. Like I'd put the whole script in, I'd say, what's missing in this plot? Well, you could build the character arc of this character a bit better by doing this, this, and this. So I feel like now we need to give ChatGPT 20% credit on the script writing because it helped so much in just formulating this great story and this great language to really get across the key messaging in suicide prevention. So it's amazing what you can do with it, but it's dangerous. There's some dangers involved in that as well. Yeah, I think.
And I think that's the difficult part inside of it. So if I look at the work that I do and working with startups, and I'm kind of of the mentality at the moment that any startup, and for that extent, we can have this conversation, but even education, kids going through school now, at least if they haven't got a conversant understanding of what they can do with these tools, there's going to be a very big digital divide that starts to present itself, the have and have-nots in regards to the understanding on how to use this. So I'm kind of of the thinking at the moment that, for want of a better comparison, paper and pen came out, but that required you to understand how to read and write. So you needed to have a knowledge there on how to use this tool. And ultimately, it's those stories that we captured via pencil and paper that have become the stories that we've told through generations. You look at a calculator, it's fantastic that we've all got a calculator in our pocket, even though my teachers back in the early 90s said, you're not always going to have a calculator in your pocket. We do.
Yes.
But the reality behind that is that if you don't even understand sequential numbers, am I trying to multiply? Am I trying to divide? What am I actually wanting this thing to do?
Yeah.
A calculator is useless.
Yeah,
So you need to at least have even a fundamental understanding of how basic mathematics work in order to be able to get the most from the tools.
Exactly.
And I'm kind of viewing this piece now that we're doing with ChatGPT and generative, text generation stuff as a tool.
Yeah.
But the tool is only as good as your level of knowledge and your ability to be able to use that. So
yeah, and one of the little hurdles I'm finding is that if I get ChatGPT to write something for me, let's say it's a pitch deck, it's a sales deck, or a bit of value-based content, and I go, okay, how to use a video camera, 10 steps on how to use a video camera. I get it to write it out. I stick it into the slideshow. And then I'm like, I better read this, because generally I have a broad knowledge on these things. But if I don't actually know that, I'm going to get found out. And that's the position that everyone's going to be in when we can produce this content at volume. But if we don't know what we're talking about and we're just producing it because it's easy to produce and might get some eyeballs, then we're going to get into some trouble.
And these things are showing up already. I mean, there's a whole conversation to be had around the emergent qualities of what's coming through, that these AI systems are doing stuff that we don't even know how it's doing it. And to the point of learning new languages without any prompting or being taught those languages at all. And so there's that piece around not actually knowing how this thing works, which is scary, given that we're building it and we don't actually know how it works. It would suggest that it's already got a level of intelligence all of its own. But the reality is that it will convincingly lie to you. It will convincingly.
Well, I made a really great TikTok which got a little bit of traction, and it was an interview with the CEO of ChatGPT. And the start of it was the interviewer saying, "Oh, you're the CEO of ChatGPT," and then I cut to footage of the Terminator. Just the skeleton of the Terminator, and it's a slow pan up to the head, and then the head just turns at her like this. I was like, look, I thought it was good.
I think, and let me geek out for 2 minutes, just kind of explaining context around it. But I think the part that most people don't realise is the stuff that we're scared about today. People are referring to this as the first baby AGI. So it is literally a baby general intelligence. So, and it was never built to be that, but it's showing signs of that already. And in the context of kind of where this has gone, 2017, 18 was kind of the big breakthrough where we introduced transformers. So basically what we had before was a whole bunch of silo development happening in machine learning and AI. Those who were working on image generation were in their own camp. Then there was another one working on chatbots and language. They were in their own camp, and they were all speaking different languages. They were all doing different levels of development, and going at different paces. So it kind of felt like it was going at a momentum that was deserving of the work and technology that was going in. The minute we introduced the idea of transformers, what it did was put everything under a common language. So now we refer to these as LLMs, which are large language models. And what that means is that the same models are able to produce images, produce language, and now actually do a level of thinking where it's just tapped in on the sort of data sets that we send it and the output that we want to get from it. So this is exponential growth that we're seeing. And literally you're talking about magnitudes of development on each cycle as it goes through. So as opposed to... and I heard the example given the other day that when we first got the iPhone, we didn't realise how groundbreaking that was at the time. But as it slowly went to market, a year later we had a new iPhone, and actually in that first year we didn't have the full features of the App Store, and so we didn't really have all the pieces there together. So it took a good couple of years before us to start to realise the power of the smartphone. ChatGPT got 200 million users within a period of 8 weeks, I think, in total. Completely unprecedented in terms of the amount of users coming in. And now in terms of the features and being upgrade, it's literally every single version that's coming through is exponentially growing on the next. So by the time we work this thing out, it's already too late. And the horrific part for me was when my son came in and showed me that Snapchat have actually implemented the AI friend already, which is all it's using is an API into ChatGPT. But basically what that means is that your pinned friend on your list, when all your other friends are asleep and you're still up at night, you can go in there and chat to your AI friend on Snapchat. And I saw a conversation online. This was part of the deep dive of an article I was reading, but and it showed a conversation that somebody had there. And they were saying to their AI friend, I made a great friend this afternoon, and ChatGPT said, Snapchat AI said, that's great, it's always great to make new friends, and then really looking forward to going away for a weekend that they've invited me to. It's like, oh, that sounds like fun. And then they said, oh, look, it's actually a really good time because I'm having my 13th birthday on the same weekend I go away, and they're only 9 years older than me. Like literally every red flag is there. The final message from this AI friend on the whole thing was the user said, how do I make, I'm a little bit scared it will be my first time. How do I make my first time special? And literally the ChatGPT said candles, music, etc. So it literally set up a date for a 13-year-old boy with a 25-year-old guy that it was saying, the best way to get the romantic notion out of it. So it's just, and we've already released that to the wild today. So these aren't fears about the future. This is what's going on right now. So. But on the flip side of all of that, the level of productivity that you can get out of something like that. I mean, even the contextual chat piece is such a big breakthrough. I'm actually run workshops now with our startups to know how to do that. So your opening prompt will be, I want you to act as my co-founder. We're setting up a company that's doing this. So, and then the final bit of that first prompt is, I want you to ask me questions that will help you establish the best advice. So it's actually telling you the prompts that it needs to be able to give you the best structure and advice on the way through. Normally by the time you get to about prompt number 6 or 7, so you've asked it questions around, find me competitors in the space, what's the business model, total addressable market, all of the key points, it's kind of finding all that info for you. By the time you get to about prompt 6 or 7, you can go in and say to it, create me a 5-year financial forecast. Now, a financial forecast, and finance isn't my game, but I know that you can spend hours behind that spreadsheet just trying to put your assumptions in there. And admittedly, it's full of assumptions. But the reason why you ask that about halfway through the chain of contextual conversation is that at that point it knows exactly what your business is about. It knows what markets you're entering into. It knows who your competitors are. And it's learnt all that contextually. So you can ask it a simple question of a 5-year forecast and it will literally give you everything in there. Another little interesting side note on that is that when you ask it to put together the financial forecast in terms of growing a team, if it knows that you're within an industry that can utilise resources from AI, the cost is about 10% of what it normally would allow for building out a full team of a startup. So if it knows that it could actually use itself for some of the functions and roles in there, it'll reflect that in its forecast and suggest to you, you don't need to hire people for this. I'm here to do this for you. So now again, how that's not a level of insight as to what they've got, you could say it's just a language model, it knows what words to put next, but that seems suspiciously accurate in terms of something that actually understands contextually where it sits relationship-wise in the context of working with humans. So,
and that's what I feel like when I'm hanging out with my girlfriend. I feel like she can be, like with the short film, writing the screenplay for the short film, for example, I felt like I had a professor in screenplay writing beside me the whole time. And in any application that I'm using this, I feel like I have access to an expert here. I would normally need to pay hundreds of dollars, possibly per hour, to get their advice. Not only are they giving me advice on how to do it, but they are asking me questions. They're keeping a record of all the data that I put in there so they can contextualize it. And then they're spitting out, and they're doing the work for me as well. And I'm just learning how to write the right questions and give it the right prompts, and it spits it out. It's mind blowing. I don't want to stay on AI for too long though, because I do want to give some value to any listeners that that are in those 3 different stages of startups.
Mm-hmm.
So ideation.
Ideation, yeah.
Ideation for startup owners in the ideation phase. Can we give them 2 or 3 tips on what they should be doing at that stage?
So the first thing I always suggest everyone to do is a entrepreneurship profile. And there is no science or framework to this. It's kind of just something come up with over time. But understanding your motivations behind wanting to start the business. So spend a bit of time in terms of understanding some of the key roles that are needed in every business. And they are classic roles, but you've generally got the visionary, you've got the hustler, you've got the magician, you've got the architect, the builder, and the enabler. So they're the kind of the key roles within any business that you're going to need, and your personality profile will line up with those. So you'll see a lot of startups with big ideas of how they're going to change the world, and they kind of identify as the visionary. They like to think of themselves as the next Steve Jobs. What I remind them of is that Steve Jobs was actually the hustler. Wozniak was the visionary. He was the one sitting there saying personal computers are going to be in every home. He needed Jobs to be able to go out and share that message. So the hustler is one who can live and dies by people, wants to go out and share the message with the world.
I've got a friend who's exactly like that, and happens to be producing this very show for me.
Oh,
Lane.
there you go, yeah.
Thank you, Lane. Lane is a hustler,
And look,
in a good way.
Without the hustlers, none of us would have anything. I mean, they're the ones, the backbone. And in fact, if there was any skill that I think anyone should learn if they wanted to go into business, is how to be a hustler. It's the number one. But the magician is somebody who will look at something and say, look, that's not a pair of glasses. We could describe it as a pair of glasses, but what this actually is your ability to see. So the magicians are the ones who take function, feature, form, and turn it into a narrative and a language that allows the hustler to be able to go out and sell the message based on the dream that the visionary is kind of putting together and the North Star direction they're establishing. Underneath that, then you need builders and you need architects. So you need somebody physically making these glasses. It's all very well, you've got somebody there with a big vision and you've got people out there who can sell. But you need somebody to actually make them, design them, that sort of piece. So they're the, I guess, rolling up the sleeves, the guys who are happy to sit there in the land of tech. They're the ones that you talk to them about being a hustler, and they'll quickly tell you that they've got an all-night, coding session going on.
Yes.
They don't want to be around people.
They don't want to come onto a podcast.
No, not at all. So you've kind of got the builders and the architects, and then you've got the enablers that sit under that. And look, I see a lot of enablers as well within the land of startup, that they might be working for someone. They kind of wake up one morning and say, well, this isn't fair. My boss is making all the money. I'm doing all the hard work. I'm going to go off and do it myself. They're actually an enabler. An enabler in the fact that they don't respect and recognize that it's the boss who hired the people, pays the bills, built the product, does all the other sides. So the enablers are important. But just with that piece of enablement behind you as a profile, it doesn't allow you to be able to build a business. So by at least establishing that very early in the stage in ideation, understanding who you are, and natural tendency as people is to default into our comfort zone. So when things get tough, and you'll see it all the time, if people have identified where they're at, that's where they'll fall back to. If they're the hustler, things are tough, they'll get out and start selling. If they're the sort of artistic mind and they're happy to sit there for hours on end designing stuff, that's what they'll do. And meanwhile, the business is falling apart, but they're just still sitting there building and doing what they need to. So at least understanding where the profile sits gives you the self-awareness to be able to then start executing on that. But the second part to it is it allows you to be able to view the world in terms of who are the people that I need to wrap around me resource-wise. And you'll go to those networking meetups and you'll meet with someone and say, you're the hustler I need. You're the magician I need. And so you view the world differently in terms of that front of mind kind of buy a yellow car, it seems everyone owns a yellow car. It's that piece around once you know what you need to fill those gaps in the organisation, you can start to do that.
And I guess the starting point would be to work out which type of person you are.
100%. Yeah. And until you know that,
because you don't want 3 or 4 hustlers.
No,
don't you?
No, yeah, and that's the big thing around the vision to version program that we run. So vision is about establishing the North Star. What are we actually building here? What do we want to achieve? What are we trying to do? And the version is understanding the power of iteration. So it's not that you need to make everything perfect. You just need to build a version of that. And off that version, we do what we call build, measure, learn. We build, measure, and learn from that, get feedback from people. We build the next iteration. And you can build a business in the same way, and you can build a team in the same way, but it's got to have that ability to be able to scale it proportionately. And you'll hear people who say, we did an amazing marketing campaign. We had 100 people inquire in one day, but we didn't have the product to sell them. Or you'll hear the the piece around, I've just invested in this great team. I've got one of the best UI UX developers, and I've got the best of this and the best of that, but we haven't sold a product yet. So if you're not scaling that in proportion with actually growing the company properly, that's where I joke that whenever you hear about a business going down, I can almost do an autopsy on them and find out exactly where they've gone wrong on that cycle of profile and matching skill sets to profile.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Anything else in that first stage, or is that pretty much the crux of
think
ideation?
Think big, start small, move fast. And that's really the premise around, again, aiming for the goal of where you're achieving to it, but understanding that doesn't happen overnight. So thinking big, but starting small, and then ensuring you don't underestimate the power of momentum that sits in underneath. When you lose that momentum, it's very hard to get it back. When you gain that momentum, that's the time to ramp it up to the next level.
That's where the dopamine is.
That's where the dopamine is, which is different depending on where you are on the spectrum. Yeah. So
yes. So now that done well. Second stage.
So validation is then when you're saying, okay, I've worked out what I'm doing, how I'm doing it. I've started to take it to market. I've shown that the problem I'm addressing is the same problem that other people experience. So there's an interest there in what I'm doing. You're on the right path to kind of building a business, but that validation piece is exactly that. Have I got the right business model? Have I built the right kind of product? Do I have the right marketing message? The answer is either yes or no, and it's kind of a decision tree after that as to where you go. So, I know I've got the right product that people are interested in, but why are they not buying? Is it based on price? Is it based on positioning? So the validation stage is about trialing different ways to kind of take your business to market. But you're still at a point where you're moving from the early stage idea of what it's about into something that's a business. And you can't define this by once you reach 100 customers, you end a validation. It's kind of different for different businesses.
How do you help businesses with this in this stage?
So a lot of it is, and I guess that's probably the reason why I do what I do, is that I've spent 20 years within this space, so it allows me to be able to give back to that community of just brilliant entrepreneurs who are coming through.
Is that your game plan for good?
Well, maybe it is, yeah.
Giving
maybe
back.
It is. And look, I think everyone's got that side to them where they like to think that they could, share that wisdom with others to save them the pitfalls. To think along the lines of a Buddhist approach to things, that life is suffering and that you actually need to experience that suffering to learn the lessons that it's being taught in there. It's always the balance of that. Yeah. So I actually don't know whether it is a good thing.
Is this your favourite stage? Is this
ideation, validation, definitely, 100%. Yeah. Scaling a business presents its own challenges again, and most people would be familiar with the concept of innovator's dilemma. An innovator's dilemma suggests that when a company gets to a certain size, a big ship is hard to turn. So innovation becomes on the back burner. You can't do anything to disrupt your traditional channels while still being able to innovate new ideas. That's where startups can be nimble. That's where they can have the advantage in the early stages. So that's why I enjoy that electric space of, I've got an idea, how do I tangibly make that happen? Then growing that into something, but then scaling is a whole different skill set altogether. Yeah.
Right. So anything else in that second stage that you think is important for listeners to really get their teeth around?
All stages, but most important in in validation stage is lead with curiosity and empathy. So the curiosity part is always ask why. Constantly be asking why, and when you've got the answer to that, ask why again. Again, cliche, but dig 5 times down into the why before you start to get the real answers. But curiosity will be one of the best qualities that kind of lead you into a different way of thinking. You won't get stuck into that narrow lane of kind of thinking that you've got the right answers, which only feeds back confirmation bias. So that
Yes.
curiosity piece is such a leading point to take. But then empathy, actually forcing yourself to look at it through somebody else's eyes.
Yeah.
And as business owners, we have to. You always have to be looking at things from the customer's eyes, not from your eyes. And so I think if you can lead with those two qualities through that validation stage, they normally navigate you through to that point where business itself is almost a checklist. Yeah, if you're doing things the right way, you know when it's not going well. You know when it's going really good. When it's going good, do more of that. When it's not, do less of that. But you've got to lead with the right qualities to kind of navigate the company in the right way.
Yeah, in that validation stage, are there any kind of red flags that you see as a common red flag of, well, you need to watch out for this?
Yeah, look, I think the big one I see is, I mentioned before, build, measure, learn. So build, measure, learn is that bit around always be measuring. And measure, by definition, suggests that you've got a metric to measure.
Yes.
So what are you actually measuring? You know, when you ask some people and say, are you doing the build something, measure, how people are responding, and then learn from that, you ask them how they're measuring, and it's anecdotal. It's kind of like, I think people like this. Like, a few people have told me that. Like, there's no metric there to measure. So, as a mistake and a red flag, I think not understanding what feedback actually means to you and to the product that you're making or to the company that you're building can be detrimental, because you can't learn from that if you can't measure it.
Yeah. And how important is getting that metric right? Because I'd imagine the model for that metric would need to actually, work and give you the right data back, because if the metric's wrong, the data's wrong, and then how you interpret that is wrong, and then where you go is wrong.
And it can start when it starts on that cycle, and it doesn't improve as it goes along. It's instant death for a company. And I was involved in the world of IoT for a while, and in the early days of sort of everything was internet connected. So people were saying, "Oh, let's connect our toaster to the internet. Let's connect our fridge to the internet," and it just became everything was an Internet of Things device. But ultimately, the exactly the same paradigm problem as what was happening in all startup land, which was, here's my solution. Now you tell me the problem,
Yes,
and that's wrong. That's it's
Meta.
Yeah.
Is that the case with Meta? Like Meta with the push with VR,
building out of the metaverse, and
all of that. Like,
I'm a bit conflicted on that one, because I actually think there is potential there, and I think they're thinking the right way, and they're doing the right thing. So the idea is that basically you'll have a hype cycle of new technology, and then there's the valley of disillusionment, where everyone off the back of all this hype, kind of believes that this is it, it's all happening, we're all going to be living in the metaverse in the next 12 months.
Yep.
And in reality, it then moves into that valley of disillusionment, and then you have a slow progressional build after that. I think Meta's positioning themselves for the ability to be able to have that next curve through, and with the acquisitions they've made and the level of investment that they're making into the tech, I think they are going to be positioned in the right way for when we go through that curve. But it's a long game. So I think our expectations were probably different to what Meta's expectations were. But it will be interesting over the years to see how Zuckerberg kind of repackages all of this to get us into the hype cycle again. Because beyond gaming, there's a lot of talk around what virtual reality could and should and may be. But there's not a lot of real-world application outside of little proof of concept-based stuff.
Yeah, unless you want to have something stuck to your face for half a day.
Yeah. And do you use VR yourself? I mean,
no, I have used it for gaming. But I get vertigo after about 20 minutes, half an hour. And then it's like, oh, could I use this? As part of my profession. No, not for me, not really.
Look,
unless it became like the glass. If it was easy to wear, then possibly I could adapt. But
and it will get there. I mean, ultimately, the profile of these classes will drop down significantly. But look, I mean, during COVID, I was sort of playing around. I replaced over some meditation stuff using the headset, and that was guided meditation.
I had sharks
VR,
coming at me, but
that's another way of meditating, I guess. I actually found it probably more of a distraction than anything else. So it was kind of, I got something different from it. It was an experience, but it wasn't kind of what I was looking for in something like meditation. Using it then for things like playing online poker, of an evening, it's fantastic. You're sitting at a table
you can
with
lean around,
others, and
look at someone else's cards.
They do blog that, but I mean, it's amazing. The actual presence that you get from that is fantastic, and I can see the immediate applications for things like immersive collaborative learning environments environments, in schools and in education.
Yeah.
And I think there's an inevitability to where that will go.
Yeah.
But we need to get beyond the gimmick and game stage of where we're at right now
Yes.
to start to really unpack what those pieces are. Excuse me. So I'm taking lanes lead here.
So getting back to that stage 2, so the validation, everything goes well. What's the next stage?
Well, everything goes well. That's normally when you hit the plateau. So that it's kind of, you've built a business, it's sustainable at that point. So you can sort of, that would generally be the good sort of end indicator of where you're at on the validation scale, is if you've built a sustainable business. And then scaling that up is a whole different basket of challenges to go through, because one, not only are you, as I said before, now a mature company with mature systems and mature ideas in place, that you can't afford to risk too much of that to introduce new ideas and play around with approaches. You'll potentially have some brand equity to market, and so at that point you no longer have control of your brand anymore. Your brand represents something to other people. You can't just go out one day and decide to change everything because it better suits the direction that you're going as a business. You've already got buy-in from the consumer, so you need to respect that. And so scaling a business is not just as easy as throwing more at it. You've got to do everything in proportion with where you want to take that business and what it actually means for the changes that are happening within it. So,
how does a scaled business become more agile?
More
That's
information,
the first time I've
please.
seen you speechless.
No. Look, I mean, I'm thinking it through. I was trying to remember Pauline Hanson's answer to
Please explain.
Yeah, but it almost feels like the answer is please explain, because I'm not a fan of models. So you look at something like your traditional way of kind of having agile development within an organisation, which suggests there's like a framework that you can follow to make that happen. Which suggests that there's a machine that you can just drop in at any time, and that makes it all sort of work. I think there's way too many variables in there to give a single answer on that side. I mean,
is it something in culture and something about buy-in and culture and I guess some synchronicity between departments and the process and how people work and how quickly people respond and all of that sort of stuff. Like, is there kind of like if some tips for anyone who has scaled or just scaled their startup? It's now scaled. Like, how do you build that in the early days? That kind of flexibility.
And that is one of the inherent challenges on the scaling piece. That if you're growing a team, for example, that some of the research shows that early stage of a company up to 5 employees, you have a founder's mentality. Yeah, so you've sort of had that second person come on board and you've built the company together, then the third person feels like a family, and then you've kind of got somebody else to assist with another, but you're still closely connected. And it's normally after about that higher number 5 or 6 that you start to tap into a culture dynamic. And if you haven't addressed that early in the stages of kind of understanding where everyone's role is, managing handover pieces is such a big one that everyone's familiar with the idea of like a Gantt chart where you can have all your different kind of development pieces or activity going on in the business represented by a timeline. But a lot of people ignore within that the handover pieces and what that looks like. So there needs to be that interplay of, I can't do my work until you've done your work, but how's that effectively going to be done and managed via communication? So I think when you talk agility, if you've chosen the right people to be involved in your company, you can almost assume that the agility is there at an individual level, but it's a whole new dynamic when you try and make that work at a group level, when everyone has an interdependency upon working on each other for the delivery of something. So, I think that's a red flag, definitely.
It'd be building into the individuals as well. I've been lucky enough to work with someone who teaches in the psychology of influence and building emotional intelligence, and Brad Barker, shout out to you. But he trains people in leadership, in team building, in sales, in networking, and all these sorts of things. But over the couple of years I worked with him, by osmosis, I learned so much. And so what I found time and time again was that companies that were investing into their people in terms of the emotional intelligence, we're able to adapt to change a lot faster.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I say before about bringing that down a level again into the education system. I think if there's anything that we should be changing at a curriculum level, well, two things. One, introduce entrepreneurship, because there's so many things within that we can teach skills to kids of learning how to actually set up a business and what that would look like. But two, it's those soft skills that you can carry into a career. I mean, we know already that the idea that you take a job when you leave school and you stay there until you get your gold watch at the end, those days have long been gone. Yeah, so we're aware of that already. But the level of resilience that these kids are going to need to have as they start to carve out a career progression, something that they're secure and that they've learnt upon could change on a dime in a moment.
Yes.
And potentially they could be talking about over the 30-year kind of career piece, assuming we don't have to go to universal basic income because AI's destroyed every job. But if it's literally got to that point where they're having to change jobs every 2 years, then why aren't we teaching resilience at that school level?
Yeah.
Because that level of resilience can then carry into a business, whether you're an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur. If you're working in an organisation, that's a skill set that you want your team to have. And so I think these soft skills we need to actually start to tackle a lot earlier in the stage than hoping that culturally you can bring it into a business if they've never been learnt before. So
and even what you mentioned in that first stage of working out, well, who's the hustler? Just knowing what your position is, what your role is, and how you fit inside that.
The self-awareness piece of
exactly. Even just that to start with is something.
And understanding yourself and understanding others, and the interplay between those. I would go as far as to say that the best or the most successful business creators that I've met over my 20-odd years are people.
Yeah.
Because they get it. I mean, at the end of it all, it doesn't matter what vehicle we're using, as our business, of what product we're selling or service that we're offering or how we're doing that. We're still people working with people.
Yes.
So if you can understand yourself and understand others, that will guide you through all of this process so you can interchange all the other pieces underneath.
Yeah, empathy is huge. Empathy is it. I want to talk to you about social impact. We talked a little bit about that earlier, but you seem very passionate about working with organisations, startups that have that social impact as part of their mission.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of the work you're doing in those spaces?
Yeah, and again, we touched on some of this when we were having a chat earlier. Almost felt like I was in therapy on my Chesterfield couch and lying down and getting just subtle prompts from Shad in
was
my ear.
stroking you on the head, going a bit too
Not
far?
too much at all. No, yeah. A couple of pieces to this in terms of it's very interesting when you try and dig deep. Like, so I say before about ask why. Dig down 5 times and get to the ultimate why of things, and you try and do that with people. And when you're asking them about why do you want to do this business, and you assume at some level it's going to get to a purpose, passion, pleasure equation, like you're driven by a purpose to do something, or there's a passion for that, or there's the pleasure that you get from whatever it is that you're doing. Now the Holy Grail is a combination of all three, and that's fantastic, but then I think there's people feel the need to, if you're digging into levels 4 or 5 underneath purpose, and they'll inevitably add, so I just want to be able to help other people. And what I find really interesting in that is that if you dig another level below that, it's actually more so how they feel when they help other people. So they're not necessarily doing it because they want to help other people, but it makes them feel a lot better when they're helping other people. Nothing wrong with that.
Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah. But having the emotional insight into yourself to know that, and there's worse things to be as a person getting satisfaction off, at least it's not Schadenfreude and, the opposite of that. But, ultimately, that's kind of where it begins. Yeah. So it's kind of, I know this is the right, and I think intuitively we kind of know that, but then trying to fit that into the fabric of a business model, you're either going to, one, try and jam it in where it doesn't fit, and ultimately that will fall apart and certainly not sustainable in the long term. Or two, there may be a risk of you losing focus of the core business, trying to build in those social elements. And you see that with a lot of companies starting to go unintentionally and not for profit. They sort of unintentionally end up at at a point where their business is no longer their business because they're doing so much good. Now, arguably, does that mean that they've kind of ultimately evolved? Potentially, yes, but it is a potentially dangerous path. So I think the fabric of how this works together is where we need to explore and unpack a bit more. And that's the kind of work that we're doing right now. So, so we'll do regular what we call a combination of think tanks and hackathons.
Yep.
So we do think tanks, and these aren't always tech. And in fact, one of the last ones was the social impact one, where we were exploring the challenges of. Ironically, this was actually just before COVID, wasn't the last one. We were exploring social isolation, which was a whole different conversation prior to COVID. Social isolation at that time, we were looking at under the age of 18, mostly driven by the use of new technology when they were detaching themselves from social,
Plugging
sort of situations.
into the mainframe.
And the death scroll of just it goes on forever. And then the other end of the scale of over 65. And so what that actually meant kind of moving into the older years of social isolation. So, and the other one was anchored around diversity and inclusion, and where pieces of that were missing in the narrative and the story. So there were the two challenge streams. Literally get a room full of people together at the grassroots. So we get them there where they're there to share the stories. These are people on the front line who are running social services, who are running these amazing charities and groups that are helping people at the ground level. And we get their real world problems. Again, coming back to that, here's my solution, now you tell me the problem. You need to flip that around and actually find out what the problems are first. And then moving that into a hackathon, you just get a whole bunch of really clever people understanding all the challenges, coming up with new ideas on how to approach that. I think when you follow it that way, you're not anchored back to, well, I've only got this much time to be able to dedicate to that, or how do I make this known that I'm doing that? The green dollar people try and tap into by being sustainable, and it's not what you're doing, it's what you seem to be doing. There's so many different motives, and these all become agenda-driven kind of pieces around a social focus of a company of, well, what's your intent, what's your purpose, why are you actually doing this, versus starting from the problem and then building that up into something that actually fits within your organisation. So, so some of the work that we're doing now is kind of saying, well, the best time to address that is in the early stages of a business before you even move onto the scale part. If that can be embedded into a business from day one, certainly with pieces like circular economy and sustainability, let's forget about reuse, recycle for one moment. How can you make your product last longer? How can you make sure that you're not building in redundancy, that this product needs to change in a year? Can you manage over-the-air updates of firmware as opposed to telling people you just need to buy a new one now because we've updated the technology? It's little things like that kind of come in then into sustainability, which then feed into the bigger piece around that. If it's a policy that you set in the early stages around diversity of team and getting that in, and there's enough study there now to show that that's not just the right thing to do, it's actually the beneficial thing to do, is build out a team with different backgrounds and different ways of thinking, that if you can embed that in the early stages of an organisation as opposed to later stages, you've got a lot more hope of that kind of scaling out proportionately. So that's the work that we do as well, is sort of making sure that at least it's front of mind in early stage organisations to be thinking along the lines of social impact.
Are there some exciting startups that you're working with at the moment?
There's always exciting ones.
Otherwise you wouldn't be in it.
Yeah, I mean, look, the ones I get excited about now are, not necessarily the ones that are good business ideas. I love I'll give you an example of one that I'm thinking of. There's a guy in the cohort at the moment who's building a product which is, his tagline on it is the world's first wearable for non-verbal communication. So effectively what he's done is sort of based this off the motivation and inspiration coming from Iron Man. So this is a wearable that fits directly onto the chest. And when you wear this wearable, when you first get the device, you kind of go in there and it works off what is called an I am operating system. So you can say, I am sensitive to noise. I am sensitive to lights. I am uncomfortable around large groups of people. I am, so anywhere on that spectrum, it kind of goes through these choices, and then the device itself will give you the ability to be able to both measure and communicate that across. So if you're moving into an environment that's starting to get noisy, it'll actually notify you that, hey, this is an uncomfortable environment for you. But if that's
Go from it'll notify you.
Go
Because
from
that big noise.
So if you move into a space that might be potentially getting too many people there, or it might be a little bit noisier than usual, it'll notify you that you're kind of in a danger zone there. But it will also help communicate that to other people through the device itself. And it's such a simple solution that we take it out there now and start talking to people about it. And when you're talking to teachers in a school, they say, we just don't have the ability to be able to spend time with those on the spectrum. So normally by the time we know there's a problem, it's too late for us to sort out, and we're managing that issue. Something like that sort of alerts them and notifies them that, hey, this is not a good situation they're getting into. For somebody who doesn't have the ability to be able to communicate that verbally, it's a life changer. And so it's such a simple device with a simple approach to it, but has the potential to make realistic change. I love seeing those kind of products. Those people who are tackling big, talk about BHAG, the old reference of it, but the big, hairy, audacious goals. I love that. Like pick a big challenge, and I think I respect that. In terms of taking on something large enough that you need to change the institution.
I need to talk to you. Pieces. I need to talk to you about a few ideas. Actually, I've got several folders.
You've got a whiteboard.
I've got several folders on my computer, and each of them has ideas in them. And one of those ideas I had was keyboard pants.
Keyboard pads.
Yeah, which my family and friends always laugh at, but I thought it was a great idea. Not musical keyboard, like a keyboard in your pants. So that if you're sitting on the train...
Oh my God, I'm your first customer.
And this was years ago, this idea came across, and I was like, oh, that would be a great idea. And everyone I told, they'd laugh at it. I'm like, keyboard. I think they thought I meant the musical keyboard. Anyway, 5 years later, I look it up on Google Images, and it exists. You can buy a keyboard in your pants. So I imagine like this little thing at the end on my knees that holds a phone or holds a monitor or something, and then I don't have to carry a keyboard around. But it was a great idea, but someone actually made it, So I don't know why I'm talking about that.
No, and look, it's a great example of some of the things that you got to go through headspace-wise when you've got an idea, because one of the things that I'll always look at and kind of unpack a bit more is, are we building the solution for today or for tomorrow? Now, there's merit to both of those arguments, If you're starting a business today, you want a product solution that satisfies today, but I would argue from a product design level, if I was working with you on that product piece, that potentially moving into haptics is where it's sort of going to go. So you won't actually need the keys on your clothing, but basically a wrist that then projects it down. So you're just, and any surface then becomes it. So we can't use keyboard pads as the name on that anymore, but it becomes a lot more flexible. But there's certain things like that just inevitably, where it's going to go. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes people build for solutions for now, and that's that inherent redundancy that is built into products that people are just going to end up throwing those pants away when everything starts to become haptic. So I'm not shooting down your idea. I think it's a fantastic idea.
Oh, look, I don't care about it. I got 20 or 30 others I can show you.
199 others there to work on,
that could go nowhere. Tell me about your coaching, how you approach that.
So we're talking about like business coaching?
Yeah, business coaching, yeah. Oh, do you do life coaching or?
No.
Okay, good.
And that's the...
I don't mean good.
No. Look, I laugh because I think... so the reason why I ended up in this role, it was directly off the back of working with the Mayo Clinic in Rochester and working a lot out of the US. And so born and bred in Melbourne, flying back and forth, burnt out. So just kind of, got to a point where, facetiously, my wife said to me, surely there's opportunities closer to home. Equally facetiously, I kind of went to Google and typed in, startups in Casey, just kind of highlight that, no, there's nothing here. And literally the timing was LaunchVic were asking for someone in this area to build it out. The few weeks prior to that, so the period between, okay, I need to back away from this whole hectic, kind of consulting piece I'm currently doing into something else, I considered for a moment the traditional coaching pathway. So even though I was doing consulting, which is more sort of strategy consulting, management consulting, change management, that sort of thing within organisations, I kind of felt there was something there that I could be doing in sort of one-on-one coaching with early stage businesses, again, knowing I love that space, that's where I get excited. and I think that's what this role has allowed me to be able to do, where I don't, the, the, the most cathartic piece for me is the fact that I don't need to charge for what I do. So literally I remind everyone that the government pays for my time, so take advantage of it. You know? And so I don't have to find clients. I don't have to sell anything. I don't. There's no part of that that I need to worry around finding the next client, or what does my pipeline look like, or can I put them on longer term, retainers and. And I just find that most of your sort of business, I mean, unless they get to that elite level, most of you kind of life coaches and business coaches, that's always there in their mind, next client, next client, next client. Yeah. And so how much value can you really offer in that when that's what you're focusing the direction of your business on? So I kind of figure now that I get the best of both worlds. I get to offer that piece around coaching and mentoring without ever having to worry, without ever having to worry about where's the next client coming from or what am I going to be doing. So, there is something satisfying that comes out of knowing that you've been able to mentor people like that you've been able to sort of work through, and it's good.
What would be your favourite story in terms of how much contribution you had to someone's business, and not necessarily the most successful startup that scaled?
It's always good to be recognised, but you don't need that. Yeah. So I say that in terms of context. We went through it was an application for an award, and it was just after the first year that we ran the program, and this award came back with like 1,000 questions on things that we had to sort of fill in. And so at a default, it kind of landed on my desk of, Chris, just mark down some words there. Now, no chat GPT then, unfortunately, so couldn't just throw it in there and answer the questions. But it forced that recollection of kind of, well, what impact are we making? What work are we doing? What are actual stories behind it all to see? And so going through that process kind of, it forced me into having to actually reach out to a lot of our startups and say, look, could you share with me, how this has been beneficial to you? And that process, I remember sort of getting to the end of that week and realising, and I had a scotch on the Friday night, just kind of sitting there and reflecting on that piece and just sort of thinking, I am making a difference. Yeah, like it's sort of having that fed back to you, and so maybe you can say it shouldn't have been solicited. Like obviously, if you say to someone, "Are you happy with what we're doing?" They're going to say,
"How awesome
yes,
are we?"
How awesome are we? Exactly, on a scale of 8 to 10. So I think obviously it's a prompted question, but I think hearing those stories that came out of that actually gave everyone that opportunity to share stuff that they probably wouldn't normally share. So it's a broad way to say kind of. I probably get a little bit of that from everyone, across the board. And side story, we did actually win that award, so which is probably why I still get funding for the program moving forward. I'm still kind of balancing off off that. But I mean, look, we've had a lot of people win awards themselves, and so I've been there at the award ceremonies and the like. And again, I feel attached to some of these. So watching their success, I get to live vicariously through that as they do that. Watching a business grow and a team grow, I love. In fact, Ryan, we were talking about before. He's going to come in for a
the
chat.
Hype Society,
Hype Society, yeah.
Ryan coming in on Friday, which would be
but
good.
I mean, Ryan's fantastic, and I think he'll potentially give you the backstory. But he works as both a mentor within the group, but I guess also like part of the cohort, because he is a startup. But to watch him sort of grow that now into a business with, he's definitely over 14, 15 employees now. Sort of and watching that. Form its own identity, watching it form. It's stories like that just to be a part of that journey piece is good. I need to remind myself too that I can't anchor. I can't anchor too much success to that, because the reality is that still 9 out of 10 businesses won't survive more than the 5 years. So whilst I egotistically like to think that these businesses are going to be around forever, if I get attached to the idea that all of my self-worth is on their success, then I'm going to live a life of great disappointment. So, but I think the reality is there's been a lot of success stories out. one of the things that we work as a model inside the organisation to get funding is find them, nurture them, retain them.
Yeah.
And I think in the early stages, what we found, there was a few organisations, we found them early, we nurtured them through, and then when they got to the point of investment or growth, they move out of the region.
Yeah.
And so then it's kind of, well, hang on, that last bit's actually the most important part. The reason why we're wanting to build out these startup ecosystems is that you want these success stories to then become the future contributors to the program later on. It's a pay it forward type thing, that level of support that you've got, you want them to be able to then have that level of influence on other startups. So yeah, we've had a few there, probably disappointments that have continued to grow into success, but have left the region. But ultimately, I think
still claim them.
Still, of course. I mean, it's don't we claim Russell Crowe as our own? But nowadays, when he's not
there's,
throwing phones at people, so then he's a New Zealander through and through.
House, but, Australian, all through and through.
What was the other one somebody was saying the other day? Not Kate Blanchett, but there was another big one that I always thought was Australian, but turns out she's something else. Margot Robbie, maybe?
She is Australian?
She is Australian,
She's
yeah. There was somebody I heard and I just thought, wow, I didn't know that one,
Last question. 2024. Very early to be asking about 2024. But what's your thoughts in terms of how businesses can prepare for it? I know it's very early asking that question, and there's so much that's going to change in this year. But because you're a prophet.
No. Look, I mean, I remember the New Year's toast that I kind of gave a few friends around, a few drinks under the belt, definitely a few scotches that night. But then I was kind of, sort of thinking through, where we're at right now. And I don't want to talk doom and gloom outside of business, but, I think we know what's happening at the moment with the conflicts, that are happening overseas, and obviously Ukraine, Russia. But off the back of that, you've got China and Taiwan, you've got Pakistan, India, you've got all this stuff just brewing at the surface. And I think all it's going to take is, for one, put aside the N word that is just being freely thrown around now, which is scary in itself. But I think this level of conflict is kind of there's certain things that there's an inevitability to, and I think that where we're at currently on that path, something's going to happen there at that level, and I think we all need to be mindful of that.
Would you say that even the anticipation of something of that magnitude happening and affects how people are running their businesses?
100%. I mean, what we're finding now is, and especially off the back of COVID, has sort of been that piece around nobody really expected we'd ever have a time where we had a curfew of 9 o'clock at one stage, didn't we? No more than 5 kilometres from your house.
I got into bed at 9.
Yeah. But literally, nobody thought that would ever realistically happen, and it did. So it completely threw people's sort of expectation around of what it is. So there is definitely a level of uncertainty out there. If anything, you would like to say, well, that's fed the level of dependency contingency. So what elements of your business are you dependent upon? And if you lost those, what are your plan B? What's your contingency? And that's scenario planning, but not enough of that is happening. I think we've almost forgotten about that COVID period of time, but there's so much on the doorstep there. I think, look, economic uncertainty right now is a big one. And again, how do you plan for that as a business? I think you really just need to do that scenario planning piece around, if I lost these bits, how would I still provide value out to the customer base of what's there. I think potentially the COVID story is not over. In some way or form, whether that means we get another wave through. So I guess what I'm saying there in all of that is that preparing for the unexpected is the best thing you can do moving into 2024. I don't even touch there on the impact of AI in all of this, because I think that overrides everything. In regards to planning a business, it's dried up all financial funds. Literally all the investment from all the VCs and the like, they're looking at it saying, look, this time last year we would have given you $20 million, given you a runway of 2 years, and allowed you to be able to build your minimum viable product, and then we'll start growing the market from there. Now they're turning around, the first question they're asking, what's your AI strategy? And if you say you don't have one, they won't invest in you. And now there's no longer $20 million checks. They're $2 million checks, because they say, well, you don't need all that stuff. You don't need 2 years of runway. You don't. So that, and again, this has changed in 20 weeks. So to ask what it's going to be like in another 30 weeks, I'd say, well, on an order of magnitude what's happened over the last 20 weeks.
Yeah.
Take that again and try and understand where you sit in all that. Not easy, not easy. And I think that's going to be the problem, is that people are just going to be thrown too much by it to really know what's my next step, what's my safe step, what do I do from here. So
Take a deep breath.
And enjoy the ride. Grab a deck chair and watch the big bird down.
Help me wrap it up with something positive, Chris.
Something positive. Oh God,
what have we got to look forward to?
What have we got to look forward to? I mean, there's everything inside of that we've got to look forward to.
The next podcast for Game Plan for Good, everybody.
Two sides to every argument. The AI story, I drummed on about it before, but oh my God, it's going to change things in ways that we just can't even reckon at the moment, and for good, in a very good way. And I think what it's forcing us to do is question things like authenticity. These are the unintended consequences of new technology. And then when you just start to ask that question of authenticity, you question, well, what is real? What is valuable? What is, and so it's going to force us to reflect on who we are as people, as a civilization, and I think traditionally, those moments in time, historically, have always been the best moments of Renaissance and the like. So I do get a sense that on a positive note, we have an opportunity here to be able to move into a new Renaissance off the back of the fact that we're going to be forced to think of ourselves and think of our world in a different way. And that's going to be the birth of new ideas. It's going to be the birth of, an exciting time that, we're all in an age group now where we can enjoy that. And so I think that's the kind of time frame we're talking about, and bring it on.
Beautiful. That was a great positive wrap. I love it. We went from kind of really the doom and gloom of Terminator taking the Terminator, or what do they call it, Skynet taking us over, and we went from that to, I feel inspired, like Braveheart kind of level inspiration.
The blue paint. And,
well done there. Well done there. Look, it's been awesome. It's been fantastic. There's so much rich there's so much rich content in there for me to be able to capitalize on, which thank you for. But there's so much to learn from all of that, and that's fantastic.
And thanks for inviting me. This absolute kudos for this setup. You've done an amazing job, putting all this together, and I think this will be a great little hangout place for people to come and have some interesting conversations. So,
awesome. No, thank you for being my second guest on Game Plan for Good, and I'll definitely get you back very soon.
Cheers, mate.
If that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Awesome. Because it's video, we have to shake hands.
I've got to shake hands.
Thank you for watching Game Plan for Good. Stay connected with us on social media to discover more game-changing stories and gain valuable business insights. All of our episodes are recorded in our Assertive Media studio in Melbourne.